Hi, I'm Chuck Norris, and this is my wife, Gina. We are here to talk about a growing concern we all share. If we look to history, our great country and freedom are under attack. We're at a tipping point, and quite possibly our country as we know it may be lost forever if we don't change the course our country is headed.
With our country at a crossroads, Chuck and I have asked ourselves what we can be doing to help support this great country we're blessed to live in, and how we can encourage our like-minded American brothers and sisters to unite and let their voices be heard. It is estimated that in the 2008 election, 30 million evangelical Christians stayed home on voting day, and Obama won the election by 10 million votes.
We know you love your family and your freedom as much as Gina and I do. And it is because of that we can no longer sit quietly or stand on the sidelines and watch our country go the way of socialism or something much worse.
Our only hope is for each of us to make sure we have not only registered to vote in the primary and the general elections for 2012, but to make sure our voices will be heard by casting our vote on Election Day.
As Edmund Burke said, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men and women do nothing. Our great president, Ronald Reagan, said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction." We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same.
President Reagan went on to say that you and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We will preserve for our children this last best hope for man on earth, or we will sentence them to take the first step into 1,000 years of darkness. If we fail, at least let our children and our children's children say of us, we justified our brief moment here. We did all that could be done.
Please stand with us. Let's unite for God and country, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. See you at the polls. Thank you.
We're going to all pay the price for this in 1 or 2 or 3 years. This is the next time we have problems in the economy, which will be not too long. We don't have any bullets left. We've shot everything we have to solve our problems. What are they going to do? Quadruple the debt again? Print more money? We don't have any trees left.
Sitting down with economist and author Max Wolf. Max, thank you very much for sitting down with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Some are saying that another economic tsunami is just around the corner. Would you agree with this?
We will definitely have another serious leg down in the U.S. and global economy, although it doesn't take a lot of wisdom to say that, because that's always true. The question is when. We've done a lot of things that are dangerous, so we could have it quite soon. And the bottom line is we haven't fixed, anyone in the United States nor around the world haven't fixed the basic problems that created the great downturn of 2007-2008. Therefore, we have those problems still, but we have done absolutely nothing to basically change the root causes of those problems in the economy, which means we are living on borrowed time.
So what are the root causes of the problems?
Well, the root causes in the United States are that for 35 years, the average American's wages has gone absolutely nowhere. They've been flat. Americans have continued to have a better and better material standard of living by working more hours, taking less vacations, and borrowing like there was no tomorrow. And the problem we have now is they cannot borrow that much again. And if Americans don't borrow and their wages don't go up, and they're not significantly going up, then Americans have to buy a lot less of the world's goods. This becomes a problem because 70% of the U.S. GDP is private consumption, and America is 22% of the world. That basically means 15% of the economic activity on this earth is American private consumption. If that turns down, which it has, and if it stays down, which it likely will, this means we've basically pushed down the level of economic activity for all 6.2 billion people on earth.
those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. David Walker's the Comptroller General of the United States, the head of a nonpartisan government accountability office, and he says that's a warning that's worth heeding. In a recent speech reported in the Financial Times, Walker says the United States could face the same fate as the Roman Empire if we don't change our ways, and soon. Walker says the U.S. is on a, quote, burning platform. Our overstretched military, growing debt, underfunded health care, and lack of immigration policy could all contribute to our downfall unless we summon the national will to act. We've known about and ignored most of this stuff for years. It's just that now, according to Walker, the window in which to fix these things is beginning to close.
The future will be a total disaster with the collapse of our capitalistic system as we know it today, wars, massive government debt defaults, and the impoverishment of large segments of Western society. That's according to our guest today, Mark Faber. He's the editor of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report. So there's the gloom and the doom.
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
what are you so concerned about?
Government debt is rising everywhere. We have stimulus packages. We have central banks that basically will print money, not just here in the United States. They have no other option than to keep the system going. And so this will be negative for the Western world compared to emerging economies.
It's going to be the trigger.
Well,
you're talking about economic Armageddon
yes,
here.
yes, absolutely. That I'm convinced. And that is, I mean, a high confidence prediction that the total collapse will come. And I'll explain how. The fiscal deficit of around $2 trillion will add, of course, to government debt. It will be, in future, very difficult for the Federal Reserve to increase short-term rates because then the interest payments on the debt go up substantially.
What is it like when capitalism collapses? What happens?
Well, when it collapses, essentially you have a currency reform, that old money is then called back and you issue new money.
So the dollars, so we're going to get new dollars. And it's going to be
probably
Zimbabwe.
at some...
When?
Well, I think for the next crisis, which may happen in 3 years or in 5 years or in 10 years. But one thing I want to stress, this crisis, nothing has been solved. That should be clear. The private sector, which is trying to deleverage, is offset by the government that is leveraging up. In other words, you don't reduce debts, you just essentially pile up on more debts, even more debts. And the problems haven't been solved, but they've been postponed.
Back with Damon Vickers, Chief Investment Officer, 9 Points Capital Partners, staying with us live out of Seattle, Washington. Damon, you guys are a hedge fund, and what you guys basically do is you try and catch breaks either to the up or downside. Apparently with oil, also with gold, you've done the timing pretty right.
Currencies look weaker, all for the reasons that we talked about before. I mean, you've got huge wage disparities. I don't know how that inevitably resolves itself. It may resolve itself in some type of a global currency crisis. And then if the global currency crisis unfolds, then inevitably you get, I guess, an alignment under a global world government, a new global currency, and a new world order. So we may be moving towards that.
Talk to us a little bit more about this currency crisis you see erupting. What does that assume about what's going to happen to the dollar?
Well, it assumes that the dollar will utterly get destroyed and become virtually worthless. You know, we have a combined, well, I mean, here's what we know. We know that if you can produce something, that this game that we have going on in the United States and on a planetary basis cannot perpetuate itself forever. We've got a $65 trillion negative net worth. We cannot possibly meet with our health care costs and our indulgent society, which we have in the United States. We can't put that against the unit labor cost of a China that can produce something at $1 an hour versus $24 an hour with health benefits and all that's built into there. So how does that inevitably resolve itself? They export real things, and the United States exports promises and pretty paper.
panic of 2008. You were spot on in the panic of 2008. You talk about the crash of 2010. What's that about?
Well, all this bailout and stimulus is going to be running out. We had the cash for clunkers. We've had all this real estate boost with the tax credits. We've had the stimulus. We had TARP. The money chain's running out. It's global, by the way. $5.5 trillion worth of money has been dumped into the system to pump it up after the market collapsed in March of 2009.
So after that money's spent, you think we're going to go right back to where we were?
Going back to where we were, and worse, because now you have all this debt piled on top of it. You can't print phantom money out of thin air, backed by nothing and producing practically nothing without destroying
you pay for it with inflation.
Exactly.
So how much
or
inflation
devaluation. Maybe devaluation.
The same thing. It has the same effect on the currency. It means we are going to be, the money we have in our pocket will buy a lot less.
You got it.
So how much less? How about you talking hyperinflation, 1,000% a year?
Maybe start at 40% less.
40%.
That's what we're looking at.
Well, what is that going to lead to in our society?
The greatest depression that's coming along the line. Go back to the Great Depression. I'll tell you why it's worse. Back then, the government had trade surpluses. We had balanced trade. We didn't have negative. We were in the positive. The consumer wasn't $14 trillion worth of debt. It's a whole different story. And back then, when we got out of the Depression, what got us out? World War II, a manufacturing capacity. We don't have that anymore.
Productivity.
There are two sides to coming to terms with an idea that's uncomfortable, unpleasant, or frightening. One is the intellectual side, the facts, the logic, etc. The other is the emotional side. I'm making this video to address a few of the basic mathematical foundations for what I believe will be the greatest collapse in history. This video is a precursor and, in fact, a prerequisite for my next video, which will be attempting to get the message across on a more emotional level. All right, so let's start with the basics. Fact number one. The U.S. imports about 66% of its oil. Now, this is common knowledge. Fact number two, 70% of that oil is used for transportation. Also common knowledge. Fact number three, the U.S. dollar is not backed by anything physical. It's backed by debt originating from the issuance of bonds. Fact number four, the U.S. debt, currently over $14 trillion, but growing, cannot be paid back. And the rest of the world knows this. Fact number five, oil is currently only sold on the global market in U.S. dollars, and this is due to a set of agreements between the U.S. and OPEC. However, this doesn't just affect OPEC. When Canada buys oil, they buy it in dollars. When France buys oil, they buy it in dollars. This particular situation is often referred to as the petrodollar status. Fact number six, the necessity to have dollars in order to purchase oil in the global market creates the demand for the dollar. And for anybody who would like to dispute this, please refer to fact number three. Fact number seven, the value of the dollar is directly tied to the demand for the dollar. Supply and demand, basic economics. The obvious conclusion, it's the petrodollar status which holds up the value of the dollar. Fact number eight, China and Russia just recently agreed to stop using the dollar in all their bilateral trade. This includes oil. Now, when Saddam Hussein did the same thing, we invaded Iraq. But we can't invade China or Russia. Now, all the facts that I've outlined here are simple, publicly accessible, verifiable. I'm not going to hold everybody's hand and take them out there to do their research. If you want to contest one of these specific ideas, you actually need to do the research yourself. Now, the following are the conclusions that I draw from these facts. The United States will lose its petrodollar status. I don't know when, I don't know the exact date, but it's inevitable. When it does, the demand for the dollar will fall precipitously. And as demand drops, the value of the dollar will evaporate. This means hyperinflation. And once hyperinflation is fully underway, other countries will begin refusing to accept dollars for products that they export. This will happen very quickly. Now remember, the U.S. imports 66% of its oil. And that oil is not going to keep coming in if exporters no longer accept U.S. dollars. And remember, we established 70% of all domestic oil consumption is used for transportation. So if you subtract that 66% from the 70%, you're left with about 4% left for transport in general. Now, it's important to realize that when we say transport, it includes 18-wheelers and all sorts of supply chain transportation, which make up a considerable part of that 70%. In this country, food transport and agriculture are completely dependent on oil. And obviously, you can't cut out food transport without causing starvation. Logical conclusion, you're not going to be able to get gasoline to drive your car. Nobody is. However, even cutting back all individual car usage to zero will not be enough to prevent catastrophe. And here's why. Agriculture, as we currently practice it in the U.S., is completely dependent on a constant stream of inputs which require transportation, especially the animal industry. Take, for instance, a chicken farm. The farm normally gets deliveries of corn or other feedstocks on a regular basis. Almost no farms grow both the feed and raise the animals. The loss of the petrodollar would lead to astronomical price increases for that transport, and that will translate into astronomical prices in the grocery store. And what you have to understand is this explosion in the cost of transport will affect every single other industry. And as the cost of doing business skyrockets, unemployment will also skyrocket. Now, a large number of the states are already on the verge of bankruptcy. They're not going to be able to feed and house this massive influx of the unemployed. People will go hungry. And when people go hungry long enough, they get desperate. And they become very, very dangerous. Now, I'm not telling you this to scare you, but if you really understand it, it probably will. When I first came to terms with this, it was earth-shattering for me. And it's no exaggeration to say that I hardly slept for weeks. But at a certain point, you have to make a decision to put your fear aside and start getting ready. Some things we can't change, but some things we can. The trick is knowing the difference.
Welcome to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. You know, the UK Banking Standards Commission says that bankers behaving badly should possibly, one day, maybe, out in the far distant future, perhaps, face jail for reckless misconduct. In the meantime, that same state today, right now, treats those protesting the ongoing crime wave of those same bankers behaving badly like this. In Oakland, pepper spray. In Istanbul, pepper spray. In Brazil, pepper spray. No court, no charges, just summary execution of pepper spray to the face. This year, the global insurrection against banker occupation has spread to Istanbul and Brazil. Stacey?
Max, indeed, as we are in the city of London, when you see all these protests going on around the world, whether it's been in Athens or Cairo or now Istanbul and Brazil, you see lines of riot police, perimeter fences, and pepper spray and tear gas. Why are the bankers able to show up at work every single day without a gas mask on, without Pepto-Bismol all over their face, and trying to protect themselves from the tear gas?
Right. The crimes of the bankers over the past 5 years, in particular, have resulted in mass wealth confiscation, sometimes outright, as is the case in Cyprus or MF Global, resulting in poverty, people on the streets protesting who now get pepper spray in the face. That's the direct result of the crime wave. The UK is saying, well, maybe some days we'll put some of these guys in jail. They don't make the connection between what they've done. They don't see the connection between their actions and the results. And that's the biggest crime of all.
And of course, I want to show an image here that I think really captures what's going on around the world. It says, Brazil woke up. And, you know, in the past few weeks in Brazil, we've seen up to 250,000 people out in the streets protesting. And they're protesting transportation, health services, education, and security, despite a heavy tax burden. Those are all declining for them because of the bankster occupation, because the crime wave over the past few years, the past few decades by the banksters has gone unpunished.
That's right. On this show, Stacey, we introduced the idea of the global insurrection against banker occupation. We saw it in the Arab Spring. We saw it in Wisconsin. We see it in Detroit. We see it in Europe. We see it in Greece. Now we see it in Brazil. It's in South America now. It is truly becoming a global insurrection. This is the first global insurrection in history. We've had other revolutions, but this is the first global insurrection against banking occupation.
And now, in the UK, it's the ground zero of bankster occupation, by the way. This is where all fraud happens, through here. And as you said at the top of the show, the UK Banking Commission urges better standards. British bankers could soon be facing harsher penalties for behaving badly. This commission was formed in the aftermath of one of the largest conspiracies in financial history, which was the rigging of global interest rates through LIBOR. hundreds of trillions of dollars market. And they formed this commission to see what they should do. And these are just recommendations for the UK government, is that they should possibly consider throwing these people in jail for reckless misconduct.
Right. This is the way Mubarak thought before a revolution in Egypt. This is the way leaders in Brazil thought. Now they've got a revolution on their hands. This is the way people around the world think that are in entrenched kleptocracies like in the UK. So they are feeding dissent here in the UK with this very minimalistic approach to banking terrorism, and the result will probably be similar, some type of insurrection. Now, I will say that this is a bit of a change from what has been the rhetoric up until very recently. Remember, folks like Boris Johnson, up until recently, the mayor of London, whose office you see behind me, would say, we've got to stop the banker bashing. We need these guys to contribute to the economy. At least they have gone off that and realized that there's no limit to the banker bashing appropriate when you're dealing with a wave of financial terrorism as they are dealing here in the UK.
And if you look at, however, at the rhetoric coming from Downing Street or the press, compare it how they did treat the rioters in the streets of London, as we covered, and Birmingham and Manchester a few years ago, 2 years ago, there were riots across the UK. Here they say, after a year which has seen major scandals involving rate rigging, money laundering, and rogue trading rock the UK's financial industry, an influential parliamentary committee recommended that senior bankers should be held more accountable for their bank's actions. One measure, it said, should be a new criminal offense of reckless misconduct, one that could carry a prison sentence. So there are all these qualifiers. And they also say there are major scandals, not major crimes of money laundering, rate rigging, and et cetera.
Right. Again, they don't want to make the connection between the results, which would be the London riots of the last couple of years, and the rate rigging and the criminality in the City of London. They refuse to make the connection. Or, so I say to them, Doughboy Cameron, or Blitzkrieg Boris, or nincompoop George Osborne. Don't be surprised when you wake up and you flip on the BBC one day and there's 100,000 Britons on the street with torches looking for the perpetrators of this financial holocaust.
Well, in fact, the Treasury Minister, Greg Clark, told the BBC that the report was an impressive piece of work and its recommendations would be carefully considered, dismissing the notion that it would be shelved once frustration with the banks had died down.
Well, for me, it's heartening because it means that the timeline of the global insurrection is going to hit the UK as in the time that I believe it will. This is why we're here doing our show, because we want a front line on this insurrection and revolution against the banksters here in the UK. So the fact that they've come out with this report shows that the timeline is in place. You know, they're beginning to smell the fires burning at the ramparts. So game on.
So here we see this polite language when dealing with massive hundreds of trillions of dollars fraud and conspiracy and crime and theft. If you think that banksters are in any way afraid of any of these actions by any parliamentary committee here in the UK, look at what they're doing in the US, where the Department of Justice theoretically has a lot more power to incarcerate people for 100+ years. Former Bank of America workers allege it lied to homeowners. 6 former Bank of America Corporation employees have alleged that the bank deliberately denied eligible homeowners loan modifications and lied to them about the status of their mortgage payments and documents. So the bank allegedly used these tactics whereby people would submit their documents for this home modification loan from the federal government, and they would call and ask where's the document. They would resend the document. Every time the Bank of America employees were instructed to throw them in the garbage, pretend they never received it, and the bank would then foreclose and receive a lot more fees than they would from the home modification program from the U.S. government. But these whistleblowers also testified under oath that Bank of America also lied in their documents, falsified information it gave to the government, which is, you know, any normal schmo would face decades in prison for that.
Right, well, the banksters and individuals are committing fraud. The banks, whether it's HSBC, Barclays, Lloyds, Royal Bank of Scotland, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, or Citibank, as an institution, they're committing fraud. But I think really the deal breaker here, the deal clincher, if you will, would be on an institutional level of the central banks, including the Bank of England. They're bringing in Mark Carney, who's a fraudster from the moment of, you say, go, from the Bank of Canada. And I think this will light the blue paper of complete insurrection in the UK, because he's going to start printing money with reckless abandon. Inflation's going to start raging. Wages are stagnant to dropping. And if you thought the poll tax riots were hot and heavy, woohoo, baby! Whoa! We got a big one coming, and we're going to cover it for you right here in the Kaiser Report. Doughboy Cameron, stupid idiot George Osborne, they've torched the flames of resurrection!
So in the United States, if, say, some Occupy Wall Street protesters were going to be meeting in front of Bank of America to protest these crimes, these ongoing crimes, those protesters would be met with pepper spray to the face, gas, tear gas thrown at them. So why are these bankers allowed to walk calmly in there and continue committing these crimes? And so you mentioned that part of this criminality is covered up by the central bankers through their quantitative easing and various cover-ups for banking crimes. So I want to go to this final headline with this Federal Reserve Bank governor. This was really eye-opening for me. Fed's Raskin shocked at low quality of work at local job fair. So this is Federal Reserve Governor Sarah Bloom Raskin, and she was speaking to the Roosevelt Institute recently. And she said that she went to a local jobs fair and she was shocked at the quality or the lack of quality of the jobs available to being offered to this local community college. There were a number of restaurant jobs, some military jobs. There were a slew of jobs from all places, swimming pool companies. I thought that was kind of interesting when I inquired about what these jobs were. They were lifeguard jobs, which I thought also was quite telling, because back in the day, to be a lifeguard, I didn't think quite required an advanced degree. These were the kind of jobs we got in high school summers, I thought. So here's the Federal Reserve governor, and one of their mandates, their dual mandates, is to increase employment. And all they're doing is pumping money, pumping money, pumping money, giving money, free money to the banksters, these very same banksters who might one day in the future face a jail sentence if they commit reckless misconduct. And she's finding that the lower and lower paid jobs being offered for more and more expensive debt-inducing education.
Well, no, the lifeguard jobs are good because you familiarize yourself with being underwater. So whether you're underwater on your mortgage, or underwater in your stock portfolio, underwater in your bond portfolio, being a lifeguard is a good job to have. You try to save yourself from being drowning to death under quantitative easing. But Edward Snowden, the whistleblower, said that what the government is doing is that they are creating better whistleblowers. And so I would posit that what the government is doing by allowing banksters to rip people off is creating better revolutionaries, basically, because if there's no jobs, what you're saying, there's no jobs. The jobs are not paying. They're junk jobs. They're the horrible, low-end, low-paid jobs, because the government is only incentivized by putting people in prison where they can profit from them. They might make a few tax dollars giving a job for somebody making 60 or 70,000 or 100,000 pounds a year, but they make double that if they get them into prison.
Yeah, so anyway, finally you're saying that there are jobs available as a pepper sprayer, because if they're creating revolutionaries, then they're creating a demand for more pepper sprayers.
Well said. Stacey Herbert, thanks for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half. I'll be speaking to Zeus. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to go to Los Angeles, speak with Zeus Yamayenis, author of the new book, Transforming Economy from Corrupted Capitalism to Connected Communities. His website. Well, Zeus, welcome to the Kaiser Report, and tell us about your website.
Okay, well, my main website is citizenzeus.com, citizenzeus.com, and the website for the book, for those interested specifically in the book and economic issues, is transformingeconomy.com.
So, Zeus, you write about the 10 shocking practices of the U.S. and global economy. That sounds like a tough list to put together, but what was the worst so far, in your opinion?
The worst, Max, is fraud closure. The scandal around robo-signings and hundreds of thousands of proven forged documents that were basically approved of at the highest levels and an electronic system that was set up to go around title transfers and your basic property reporting and transfer requirements that are strictly against the law. And again, there are hundreds of thousands of instances of these, and not a single significant prosecution in any of this. In fact, not much investigation whatsoever. And, you know, there was this funny attorneys general that was supposed to be $25 billion to help out. Only $8.5 billion of that was in cash. And as it turns out, as early as the beginning of this year, not a single dime has actually made it to a homeowner. And I mean, I find that absolutely scandalous. Not only that homeowners themselves are not getting anything, but the fact that there aren't any investigations or prosecutions on this. It's a slam dunk. And in both cases, the getting around property reporting requirements and the clear forgeries, and yet nothing has happened.
So Zeus, you're in Los Angeles, California, and why not some kind of Academy Awards type show for the fraud of the year? And he can, instead of the Oscar, it could be the Eric Holder. You know, I mean, Fraud Closure, I think, should be nominated for the fraud of the year. But there's the LIBOR scandal, there's the mis-selling, all the mis-selling scandals, there's, you know, all the various bubbles and pops and all the crimes committed on Wall Street. What about something like that? You know, an Academy Award for fraud in America. You know, turn this heinous criminal activity into something more entertaining.
Well, I tell you, if it's not at least entertaining, shine some light on it. Get people to see it. You know, it's such a farce. It should be definitely win Best Oscar for either horror picture or comedy picture or a comedy horror picture. One of the two. I think it would win with a long shot. It might be a unanimous selection.
Of course, we now know from PRISM and the NSA scandal that the results of the Academy Awards are known beforehand. So that is another lie that people tell. So whoever the accountant is for them, I think it was PricewaterhouseCoopers, they're lying about that as well. Okay, so you also talk about toxic assets as part of the top 10, running for the Academy Award for fraud in America. Tell us about toxic assets.
First of all, look at the term toxic assets. Toxic things are never good, and toxic things are 100% bad. There's never a toxic thing that doesn't do harm. That's the very definition of the term. Assets, on the other hand, are 100% good. I mean, assets by very definition are something that are an asset. They are something that adds value. There's something that are good. How can you put the two of those together and have a meaningful term? They cannot coexist. And so one has to look deeper into what that term actually means and what it's serving. And what that term means and serves is we have an asset that's not an asset. What it really means is fake asset that ends up destroying value when it's introduced into a system, precisely because you pretend as if it does have value. And that's really what fraud is.
All right, let me make another nomination for Fraud of the Year to consider, for your consideration out there in Los Angeles. Goldman Sachs, they have a relationship with their clients where they essentially gift them billions of dollars that they borrow from the government at 0% interest, that they then use to engage in fraudulent schemes like the Facebook IPO or market rigging, LIBOR rigging, energy market rigging. And they go buy a lot of wine and chateaus with those ill-gotten gains. And now the client of Goldman Sachs is using 15,000 cases of overinflated wine prices to collateralize another loan. Does this qualify? Could this be the winner for Fraud of the Year this year in Los Angeles? What do you think?
I think that one's pretty far up there. I mean, they've gotten so good about taking essentially either things with minimal or no value and then blowing them up into the latest hot thing that absolutely everybody has to have or that's worth billions of dollars. In the book, I compared it to me valuing my kitty litter box at $1 million and then leveraging that into $1 billion to buy up companies. It's basically the same thing. There's nothing really behind my claim either, and there's certainly nothing behind their claim with this wine. It's something they assign to it, and then they profit from it. The only way a market can work is if other people are essentially, and their demand is inputting into what something is valued. Fraud is basically that, Max. Fraud is taking value, essentially assigning value or creating value out of nothing, which is what they're doing, and then passing it off as something. I mean, that's a very simple way of putting it. And it doesn't take too much to scratch below the surface to see that. The more and more essentially outrageous they become with their leveraging and so forth, the more outrageous these examples like these wine boxes and so forth come forward. And the more it shows how out of touch they are with what it really means to work, what it really means to produce, what it really means to give.
Well, speaking of kitty litter, let's talk about Eric Holder for a second. Because, of course, on the face of the award for biggest fraud of the year, it's actually a statue of Eric Holder. And, of course, he's completely naked because this has to work with the NSA PRISM environment where everyone is completely naked before the database. Why doesn't he prosecute? Is it because he wants to go after some hot chickses in Los Angeles? Or is he just plain corrupt? Or is he that stupid? What do you think?
I mean, I have to say, the placeholder, which is his nickname, is perfect for him. I mean, he has done nothing. I mean, what? I mean, I can't name a single enforcement action this man has been involved in. I don't even know what he's doing. Now, what he's doing with his time on the side when he's not doing his job, I have no idea. You know, the ones that you come up with, I don't think he's stupid. You know, I don't think, I just don't know what he's doing. I mean, he comes from that corporate environment, so it's possible that he's just simply protecting his friends, but it just doesn't seem that he has any consciousness about doing his job. You know, it's just amazing to me. It's like they could have put a crash test dummy in for his position and he would be doing just as good a job.
Yeah, I don't see him. He doesn't appear to have any street smarts like Barack Obama. You know, another guy. He doesn't appear to have any street smarts. I mean, he's institutionally, he knows the rap that's been forced into him from the crooks, you know, at the various Ivy League universities. You know, but for a couple of brothers, they seem remarkably ignorant about what happens on the street, man. I mean, they need to go uptown and, like, live with the people for a bit and understand how things work. But, of course, that'll never happen. We have these guys who are more interested in their handicap on the country club than actually applying justice, whatever that concept means. Eric Holder, you disgraceful bum. Anyway, your new book is called Transforming Economy. So I assume that there's some hope in this book. Of course, none of it will make it to the light of day because we live in a kleptocracy. But what are some of the ideas?
Well, I think, I mean, if I were, first of all, I mean, I think most of it is shifting the way that we look at the economy. And for me, I mean, I'm trying to shift from this taking, exploiting economy to a more giving, contributing, and producing economy. And really, it requires two things from people. And just outline general form. One is you need to find out the ways in which you're contributing to this phony economy, and you got to stop doing that. And you know, a simple example of that is just removing your money from these too big to fail banks and putting them into local banks and local enterprises. But the other more important thing is developing a notion of economy based on productivity. And producing really means giving to the future instead of taking from it. So any kind of practice that is borrowing from the future and wasting it or consuming it now is kind of the old way. And so, I mean, there are many ways that we can do that as a society. We can begin to start sharing our resources on the local level. We can do circle lending, cutting banks out. We can start doing crowdfunding also and beginning to use our own power and our own initiative and our own creativity, sharing that and developing our own modes of economy. And I think that that's what the book does. The first part is a critique of our present corrupted capitalism. The second section has to do with how we are in that transitional part right now, transforming the economy. And then the third part really has to do with how can we engage in things like debt forgiveness? How can we engage in things like stopping our own collusion with these people? And then also creating grassroots level efforts to create enforcement and to create an alternative way of actually producing and giving to the future instead of taking from it. And I use specific examples, and I also use in doing that.
Right. Well, Zeus, I just had your answer analyzed by an NSA PRISM computer, and the results are in. There's a drone heading your way with a weaponized rocket. You got to be careful, buddy. You can't talk about anything like that. You'll be droned to death in Obama's America. Okay. So finally, let me ask you about gold, silver, and Bitcoin. These are three currencies that people are, you know, trying to move into because they are no counterparty risk. They've got thousands of years, or in case of Bitcoin at least, it's got some real integrity there and intrinsic value. will the establishment be able to come down as hard on gold, silver, and Bitcoin forever as they're doing now, or will these survive once again this period, this dark ages in America?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Bitcoin in particular is interesting because it is signaling that not only, I mean, a lot of our values are moving into this much more non-material realm, but now with Bitcoin, you actually have monetary systems, you know, moving into the cyber realm. I think really what gold, silver, and Bitcoin share is a desire for people to take autonomy and to empower themselves against a system they know is corrupt and they know is manipulating and exploiting them. I mean, anytime you can have the kinds of scandals we had, like with fraud closure, and there's no prosecution, and then we have to pay the liabilities for these things, people are looking for, at least, especially in the transition period, a way to say, I have actual value. And buying physical gold and silver, I think, is an effective way to do that on an individual and family level. And developing the system of Bitcoin is a way to have a challenging competitor to essentially an empty money system created from nations that's based essentially on nothing, just on money printing. So I'm in favor of those developing and going forward, because the way to get democratic capitalism is to have effective, people-based, grassroots-based competitors to this phony, top-down 1% system that we have right now. And that's really what we've got to look for, is we look for the things that we can use and become available to us now, and then use it to begin to make the transition into a more globally aware, locally based economies that take value and share value and cut these parasites out of the cycle.
Well said. All right, Zeus, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you very much, Max. I appreciate it.
Okay, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Zeus Yamayanis of CitizenZeus.com. If you'd like to send us an email, please do so at kaiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.
This is going to be a scary part of the episode, because this is my current thinking, and these things don't have to be this way, and they probably won't be this way. But I would like to start a discussion on what changes, because the last thing before world resets is war. There's economic strife, there's civil unrest, and then there's global war. And global war is just to legally kill the people that were in power, to reset the world, and then also to move borders and alliances around. And that's what happened in the First World War and the Second World War. So the alliances are already being changed. The world as we have built it in the past is now at the breaking point. And right now, this is First World, right up here. This is all First World here. And this is Third World, and Third World. This is the West and the Western way of life. Everything that has ruled the world has really, for the last several hundred years, been here. But things are changing. We used to be the biggest creditor. We're now the biggest debtor in the history of all the world. So what happens to the alliances? I'm going to give you some general ideas, and we're going to color code them, and I'll go through the map. Thugocracy or communist. This is like China, or a country like Russia, where Putin is in charge. They make up the rules as the leaders decide. Now, there's a third world thugocracy, which I would put in like Venezuela, where it's a serf state, where the people, you have somewhat of a chance in this kind of a thugocracy. There are the rich ruling class, and everybody in Russia's not a total slave, but it's not freedom like we understand. But if you're down in Venezuela, it's a nightmare. This is the best of the third world serf states now is probably like Mexico, and it's only because we're on the border. But between the corruption in their government and the drugs, there's no chance of escaping this. the Muslim Brotherhood, and the reason we put a slash here, it's not just the Muslim Brotherhood, it could also be a Islamic theocracy or caliphate. And then a Nazi influence. There's going to be a pushback from this to counterbalance. And then free states. The free states, the only one, honestly, I can really say that in my heart I really believe will be free, will be Israel. I think Canada will still generally be free, but I'm not sure. I know he's fighting over New Zealand, or I mean Greenland. But I think everything else is about to really change. And let me show you how I think this is going to line up. Your Muslim influence is going to spread all across, and I think up to Spain. I don't know how far down, but I think you will split the lower part with first world thugocracy, which is China. And I think China is going to be, where it used to be kind of the United States was the counterbalance here. I think you're going to start to see the counterbalance in this part of the world all be China and New Zealand. I hope you like Chinese food, James Cameron, because I think you're about to have a lot of it. Now, the United States used to be the protectorate, the protectors of the former Soviet Union. I think that because you are for a time period going to have Nazi influence up here and maybe a Nazi state come around. I think you might even have some Nazi influence in the United States, unfortunately, because we've had it before, and it will happen there and there, I think. What's going to happen, I believe, is Russia is going to sweep in, and the people of Europe will beg for the thugocracy of Russia. And Russia will sweep across, and I think the only thing that is going to stop them, quite honestly, will be Islam. And I can't decide yet who gets the United Kingdom, but I think that there is going to be a sharing of an awful lot of stuff. I think what's going to happen is I think China's going to come in and they're going to make a deal with Islam. And they'll say, look, we'll just keep things, you keep things stable there, we'll keep everybody else away from you. You just keep everything stable. You just keep giving us oil and everything else. Russia already has oil and gas, plenty of it. They're going to carve it out like this. I think Russia is going to take most of Europe, and they will fight, but the counterbalance to Islam in Europe will be the Nazis. They'll kill each other, and I think Russia will come in and take that. So now what happens here? Well, I think there's going to be a slight influence in South America, in Mexico, and in the United States. I think it is going to be more significant than anyone imagines. And I believe that you are also then going to be co-ruled by a thugocracy of this part of the world. And I think it's going to be, at least in our case, I think it's going to be China. China will be the balance of our power. They will use Islam as the real enforcers that they will then help us. And whoever is in power in our country will be ruled by an American. But it will be a technocrat that will answer to China. And they will stomp things out and use Islam as much as they have to get rid of anybody who's standing up, I think, but we are, I believe, unfortunately, in the end, going to be a third world state. And I think you're going to see a lot of third world action in the former West, unfortunately. Anybody living like America? No. I think we are going to be so bankrupt and we're going to be so ruled over because of the mistakes that we have made in the past that we will resemble a little more Mexico than America. What does that mean for Canada? I don't know. What does that mean for the rest of the world? You tell me. Because do you see the people in Greenland gathering a massive army to fight this back? Do you see Canada, Greenland, or who else? Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where the big march to freedom really is. Tell me. Where is an understanding of freedom going to come from? The West is going to be devastated economically. And we have killed our own cultures so horribly that we don't even know who we are anymore. And as soon as we lose our stuff, we will definitely lose our way because our stuff has begun to define us. And that's why I think Common Core is here, because it will train us to be a serf state. It will train us and it will keep us in order to answer to the Chinese or whoever it is. Look for an alliance between China and Islam. Look for another alliance between Russia and Iran and Europe, especially Germany. Those two alliances, I think, are going to happen. Where do we fall? I don't know. Future is not written. It probably doesn't look very much like that. I hope to God it doesn't. But I'd sure like to see your map. What are the new alliances? And where is it that the real movement for freedom, where does it actually come from in the future?
The U.S. economy is in dreadful limbo, and at this point, every American wants to know, how bad can it get? Well, one answer being proposed is that the historical collapse of the Soviet Union is a clear model for America's future. And joining me now is Dmitry Orlov, the man who proposed this theory that is gaining extremely popular ground. Thank you for joining me, Dmitry.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
You argue that the U.S. will soon turn into the former USA. What do you mean?
I've been looking at this for a couple of decades now, ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, which I watched. And ever since then, it had occurred to me that the United States is basically following the same trajectory as the Soviet Union followed. The timing is, of course, different, but a lot of the things that doomed the Soviet experiment are also in the process of dooming the American experiment. And this revolves around politics, around militarism, around energy, and many other factors as well.
Your book is called Reinventing Collapse, the Soviet Example and American Prospects. If you had to pick out your strongest correlation between the collapse of the Soviet Union and what's taking place now in the U.S., what would your argument be?
Inability to grow the economy, resulting in debt that has to be taken on at a completely unsustainable rate.
What do you believe that the Obama administration should be doing now that you argue they're getting wrong?
They're trying to restart the economy. They have learned nothing from the run-up in commodities prices that preceded this collapse. And so restarting the economy is the wrong move. They have to start building a different economy based on, not on continuous growth and exponential expansion, but sustainability And in fact, they could do pretty well even if they didn't grow the economy, provided they did a good job and provided for the welfare of the people in the country, gave them the basics, gave them food and shelter and transportation and security.
So what do you have then left? Just a country that's surviving?
Yes, and in fact that's pretty good, because if you compare that to the Soviet example, a lot of people died unnecessarily. A lot of lives were ruined and cut short. There was a flood of refugees. That is all completely avoidable here.
So what you're arguing is that the collapse of America is unavoidable. What Americans can prepare for is how bad the consequences you say will get.
That is basically what I'm saying. I think that, you could compare what's going on in the United States to a tsunami or a hurricane or an asteroid impact. It's something that's been in the making for a long time. It is going to happen. And talking about averting it is just basically a waste of time. What we should be talking about is how we can prepare it and build a different society, perhaps, different ways, different economy that's at a much lower level of resource expenditure that provides the basics that people need to survive and have decent conditions.
What is the most important thing that Americans can do right now to prepare for the worst, if it is to come?
I think the most basic thing that people have to do in this country is meet their neighbors. Everybody walks around talking on their cell phones, ignoring the people directly around them. There's very little face-to-face communication. There's very little sense of community. People have a very sort of boxed-in sense of what's mine and what's yours, and refuse to share. People should try to get to know each other and try to work out arrangements where they share responsibilities and where they share whatever they have. For instance, a lot of people don't need to have their own car. They could share a car amongst friends. I've done it with friends. That's a specific thing that people can start doing that will work for them.
That actually speaks to your argument that the Soviet Union, the people living in the Soviet Union, were more capable of surviving the collapse than Americans are capable of surviving a collapse. Why do you think so?
Well, that is actually a big part of my argument, which is in a collapse, a lot of positives become negatives and vice versa. So, for instance, the housing crisis in Russia meant that, families were living in cramped apartments, 3 generations all living together on top of each other. Well, after collapse, it means that they were on hand to help each other. So the grandparents could take care of the children while the adults were out doing something, trying to survive. Big communal apartments, of course, are not that great, but they're very cheap to heat. So if you have a fuel crisis, it's very helpful, much better than suburban housing. Many other examples like that. Private cars are convenient, and public transportation not so. But if you have a gasoline shortage, then you have public transportation. That can be a lifesaver.
Your predictions on the security of this country are quite frightening, and you base your theory on the instability you witnessed following the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Well, I was in Russia during periods of time when people thought I was insane to even go there. And during that time, some friends of mine got killed. A lot of people got mugged and terrorized. And I just saw the environment. I would get on a train, and some of the passengers were escorted on board by soldiers armed with Kalashnikovs, because that was the security environment. I heard of various rent-a-cop schemes where you have to pay off a policeman to do this and that. Once there's a collapse, the only skills they have are these violent skills involving weapons, and that's how they make money. So unless somebody finds something useful for them to do, work in security, then they'll go into business for themselves, and so much the worse for everyone else. This country maintains over 1,000 overseas military bases. Once those budgets start dwindling because the tax base is shrinking and the deficits can't be financed, those soldiers will have to be brought back, and those bases will have to be shut down. So that means a lot of soldiers and no economy, no domestic economy to reintegrate them into. The prison population is per capita largest in the world, and right now it's being whittled down. California is in the process of releasing, I think, 50,000 of them. A lot of states will end up paroling prisoners. So there'll be a flood of prisoners, basically in the same situation, where there isn't a domestic economy for them. They will have to find some way to find what they need, possibly through violence.
Dimitri, what should people be doing with their money right now? Because the popular answer is buy gold. But what if people only have a little bit amount of savings? What should they be doing with their dollars?
The easiest thing to do with a little savings is to start a tiny little business, not necessarily a going concern, but get the tools together. So if you're good at carpentry, buy carpentry tools and supplies. If you're good at sewing, for instance, get a really good sewing machine and everything you need to do that. Because in the future, you will be able to survive by making money with these things, when the money itself is gone and the money you have now is worthless. But in general, the way to invest money in a collapsing economy is to invest it in ways so that you lose it slowly over time as opposed to all at once.
What will happen to the rest of the world if America collapses? Because this crisis is a global crisis. What will happen to the European countries? What will happen to Russia, China, India if America collapses?
A lot of countries will go through a political upheaval for two reasons. One is the middle class in those countries is very dependent on America more than anybody else. They're dependent on international finance and commerce. Once that goes away, they pretty much have nothing more to offer to their own people, so their own people will rebel. So there will be a conflict between these middle-class elites and all of the populations that they have been nominally in charge of all these years while the times were moderately good. So there will be a lot of rebellion throughout the world.
You say that at this point you consider what you're doing a community service. What you're doing, lecturing, you have a blog that's very popular, you've authored a book, you've written many articles, and it's a community service for Americans?
Every time I've tried to stop, a flood of emails comes in begging me to continue, so I can't disappoint that many people.
What are people saying? What do they want to know?
A lot of people ask the same question over and over again, which is when. You know, I get desperate emails. I have a bride in the Ukraine. Will the United States hold together for the next 6 months because it'll take us that long to get a visa? That sort of thing. That was one of the most desperate pleas I got so far. But a lot of people want to know about timing, and I can't give them that information. What I can do is point people towards a great deal of resources on how they can help themselves and restructure their lives and try to get out of debt, for instance. You know, maybe take up a little bit of farming so that they have some food coming in.
From what I read, you propose that if people are paying rent or a mortgage, you don't have to pay anymore. If you go to work, don't overwork yourself, because that job is going to come to an end either by the person getting fired or quitting. Is that a little bit radical? You're saying don't pay your bills and don't try hard at work?
A lot of my proposals are basically dares. I dare people to think through the consequences, and I'm hoping that helps people get off the autopilot and actually live in ways that are more meaningful. That they begin to understand why they're doing what they're doing. I don't expect, actually, everybody to go into foreclosure by listening to my talk.
Dimitri, in terms of preparing for a collapse, I understand you practice what you preach. You also invested in a boat so that you would eventually be able to get into the shipping business and undercut the cost of trucks. And this is sort of like a survival method that you have come up with.
Actually, this is part of a business plan. A bunch of my associates and I are putting together a sail transport network. The idea is to ship organic produce from farms along the coast to population centers using sailboats and sell them at farmers markets that are right at the dockside. This is a completely carbon-free method of supplying food to population centers that's not dependent on anything except sunshine and soil and water and wind.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. This is J.R. Moore with the second hour here on Wednesday, the 9th day of March, year of our Lord 2011. Well, my guest this hour is a very dear friend, Mr. Tim Spencer. Tim is my neighbor. He lives just a few minutes' drive from me. Tim is a veteran of the United States Navy Submarine Corps, Here's something many of you probably don't know about the United States Navy Submarine Corps. The entry levels, the entrance examination, the standards that you have to pass to be on a crew of a submarine are a lot higher than the usual Navy. You can join the Navy and have a IQ of 100, maybe probably less, probably at 90 or 95, and manage to pass the entrance examination and get in the Navy. That's not the way it is with the Submarine Corps. The lowest IQ of any member on a U.S. Navy submarine is 120, and it goes up from there. Men only. Thank you very much. No women. And these are very bright men, and they have to be. They have to also pass psychological tests to show that they won't go nuts being locked up in a tin can underwater for 6 months at a time, not seeing daylight. They have to pass very strict psychological evaluations, and of course they're very bright men, and they receive very intense training because you can't make mistakes when you're 500 feet below the ocean. That's not, you just can't do that. So without further ado, Tim, are you there, sir?
Yes, I am. Good morning, John.
Well, good morning, sir. Tim, I know your passion is preparedness, like mine is. You run a website, ruralsurvival.info. What brought you to the Ozarks initially?
Well, I hope I'm not boring your listeners with the same story, but basically in 1986 at the Hebert Federal Building in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I worked in the submarine manning shop, directly across the hall from that, I saw a map of the United States that was colored in with yellow highlighter. There were very few areas that were not colored in. After seeing it for a couple of days, I inquired of the master chief that worked in that office what the map was about. He really wouldn't tell me anything about it, other than, in fact, he told me that when I get out of the Navy, that I should move to one of the areas that were white, not shaded in with the yellow highlighter. This area of the Missouri Ozarks was one of those 3 places. And that is why we moved here. Now, at the time, I had no idea what the significance of the map was. I do now, but right. At the time, I did not.
In fact, you and I met, it was September 2008. There was a fundraiser. Yes. I had a client charged with homicide, and the Western Cherokee Nation was sponsoring it. I saw you walking around. You and I never met before that. You have this ID badge on and said, Tim Spencer, Director of Emergency Preparedness, Western Cherokee Nation. And I introduced myself, and I gave you a copy of my global warming DVD, didn't I?
Yes, you did. And then
you
I
called me up
after,
a week later. What did you tell me when you called me up a week later?
That I'd seen that map that was on that DVD before.
Yeah. And that was the beginning of our friendship. Tell our listeners about the lunch you and I and your wife had at the Viburnum restaurant. It's been about 2 years ago this spring.
Yes, it was. Yes, well, we were at the firearms training class that you were teaching. We broke for lunch, and we were talking about why Lori and I decided not to move back to Florida, but decided to come here. And the gist of the conversation was, in my wife's term, that damn map.
Right. And your wife was telling me, she said, John, I like fresh seafood.
She does.
She said, John, I don't like cold weather. I don't like snow. I don't like ice. I don't even like Missouri, but we're here because of that damn map.
That's correct. That's absolutely.
And you and I both laughed at that. But she was being quite frank, and you and your wife are both from Central Florida, and clearly, obviously, the Ozarks does not have the climate of Central Florida, does it?
No, it doesn't have the climate. It doesn't have the economic opportunities. It doesn't have the recreational opportunities, and it certainly doesn't have the educational opportunities I would like my children to have. But you have to understand, when I saw this map, I was not told if this was something that was going to happen in 2 or 3 years, or it was something that's going to happen in 30 or 40 years.
Right.
I honestly don't think the people that made the map knew.
Well, at the briefings, and you're right, you weren't at the classified briefing, of course.
No, sir, I was not. I never attended one.
But the men that were at the briefings, they were basically told this, Tim, gentlemen, this will happen during your lifetimes, not your children's, not your grandchildren's. This will happen during your lifetimes. And I've yet to meet a veteran who was at the classified briefings who was giving a very concise time frame, just a very general time frame that would happen during their lifetime.
And I firmly believe that is true. I see no reason and no benefit for the Navy to put out that kind of information unless it was true.
No. And as I told my local mayor in a nearby community, he said, John, I don't quite buy into this. And I said, Mr. Mayor, you know, the United States Navy is not exactly known for tinfoil hat conspiracy theories, are they? And he kind of shook his head no. So,
yeah.
Anyway, Tim, I know that this website, ruralsurvival.info, is one of your passions, and that you do want to see help people get prepared, give them knowledge, help educate each other. It's kind of a win-win situation for everybody, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Tim, we got a caller on hold here. You ready to take some calls?
Absolutely, John.
Okay, here we go. Randy in Louisiana. Go ahead, Randy.
Hello, John. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Randy.
Hi, Randy. Go ahead.
I had a question for you. I've heard you talk about Atlanta becoming the eastern capital of the U.S. and wanted to know what makes you say that.
It's the highest altitude major city east of the Mississippi. They don't have high hopes of it surviving, by the way, because that's why the Denver is the main capital. But they felt they needed an administrative capital east of the Mississippi, and that's the place they picked.
When I heard you make the comment, I was thinking, well, maybe Atlanta's the place to move, and maybe I could get a job after this event.
Well, if you're connected to the government, you may be okay. We're looking at some pretty hard times. Atlanta is a major metropolitan area, and I really can't prognosticate, Randy, on what conditions would be there for just regular civilians who are not connected to the government. It could be pretty harsh.
So, no, I really wasn't planning on moving to Atlanta, but it was just a thought I think some people may have. But if you think, now from my research, it looks like Atlanta's between 800 and 1,000 feet in elevation.
Right, it's pretty marginal. The Navy says 400 feet's a minimum. I say you want to at least double that at 800 feet. It's pretty minimum and pretty marginal.
Randy, if I could throw something in, if you're intent on the Atlanta area, about 30 miles north of Atlanta is an area called Rome, Georgia. Now, they've got elevations there in the 1,700 to 1,800 foot range.
I'll have to take a look at that.
Okay, and keep in mind, Randy, just in general, once you're east of Mississippi, your number of people per square mile increases dramatically.
Yeah. Okay, what about a second question for you here? What can you tell me about, I've heard that there would be a component of the changes would be a solar scorching, and that you should prepare to be under 8 feet of earth or 2 feet of concrete.
Right.
What is the duration?
Right, the government's preoccupation with being underground didn't make much sense to me until I figured out that component of it. This event would last probably 1 to 2 or 3 hours, 140-degree temperatures, intense radiation, intense heat for 1 to 3 hours, which if you're caught out in it would cause you probably have skin cancer. People can tolerate, healthy adults, I should say, can tolerate 140 degrees for a couple of hours. I routinely do it in a sauna and don't think much of it. But people that have a weak heart or small infants, it may just flat out kill them. 10 feet of earth would be a good thing to reflect the radiation and be completely safe. And it's part of what we're looking at, and that's what the government's preparing for.
What sort of notice would we have that this solar scorching is about to happen?
It would probably be the same notice we get now, like we were talking in the first hour with Ann Morrison about a coronal mass ejection. These things are routinely reported. This, of course, would be unprecedented coronal mass ejection that would cause great damage, and that's all the notice we would get.
What about the duration of the, and I know you don't want to talk about when this earth change event would happen, but the duration, how long do you think we would be involved in this drastic weather and earthquakes and volcanoes and such?
Pretty much the rest of our lives. That's a very young person may see some return to what might be called normal. We're at right now what might be the beginning of either a mini ice age or a full-blown ice age due to the Gulf Stream stopping. It will be several years before we know which way it's going. And Ann Morrison mentioned this the first hour, we've had 5 decades up until the year 2000 of unusually mild, predictable weather. That's pretty much over. We're getting now into an era of weather that's unpredictable and with very violent consequences. And that's going to go on for quite a few decades.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, I appreciate your responses.
Okay. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Let's see. We got Tom in New York. Go ahead, Tom.
Yes. Good morning, John. I've got a quick question for you. You've seen the map. Your guest has seen the map. My secondary home is in the mountains of Pennsylvania. Property starts at 900 feet. Would I be safe there?
Well, people always focus on altitude. You need to think about a number of things, Tom. The population density. Are you within the average automobile, for example, has a half a tank of gas, 150-mile range with half a tank. Are you within half a tank of driving range of a major metropolitan area at your location there?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've got a good vantage point from where I'm at, and I know what you're saying, John.
You can see them coming, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. John, listen to me.
Go ahead.
I'm highly trained in these areas, and I'm telling you, there's nothing coming up that hill.
Okay, well...
I mean, unless it's coming by helicopter or F-16, I don't have anything to worry about.
I don't doubt that. You need to have plenty of potable water for drinking and for your car.
It's all covered, John. I just wanted to make sure that the lake wasn't going to swallow me at 900 feet.
Well, there's nothing's carved in the granite here.
Yeah, well,
no
guarantees.
Tim, we have another caller here. Make sure I get the right one. Rodney in Illinois. Go ahead, Rodney.
Good morning, John. Congratulations on your new time slot. I'm enjoying it very much. Hey, Tim, I was wondering, do you have a satellite receiver that you can listen to John while you're out doing your chores?
No, I don't. No, unfortunately, I don't.
Well, I do, and of course, when I'm around the house, I rebroadcast on a small transmitter, and I understand you're looking for writers. I'm not.
Yes.
I'm a carpenter, but I have written up my own experience on my testing of quite a number of FM transmitters. And I was wondering if I could barter with you. So I was hoping you had a satellite receiver, because you could, as soon as you got this in the mail, you could plug it in and anywhere you went on your property, and you could be listening to the Patriot Radio show of your choice. But how can I get in touch with you, Tim, to maybe flesh out some of this idea I've got?
Well, I'll give you my email address: office, OFFICE, at Rural Survival, RURALSURVIVAL.info, and feel free to write me.
Okay, Tim, I'll do that. Thanks, John.
Okay, well, I appreciate the call, Rodney. And one of the neat things, Tim, about talk radio and these modern communications devices is you and I are in instant communication with people all over the planet in real time. Tim, you're just a little bit younger than me, but you lived most of your adult life like I did without having access to these modern communication devices.
Oh, you're so correct. I can't believe how technology has advanced. When you and I were in the military, we had to wait for a time slot on an Autobahn line to call back to CONUS, and I remember all that.
Jim, can I start off by asking you why you think the equity markets are not responding to the stabilization plans that are being introduced around the world at the moment?
Because they're absurd.
They're preempting the collapse of the dollar. If gold goes to 1,500, that's not because dentists are suddenly busy, filling people's teeth. It has to do with the fact that the dollar is imploding.
You've got the increasing budget deficits in the U.S., but one thing about treasuries is that the Fed has the ability to buy treasuries and literally print dollars. So you're kind of dealing with a fiat currency, and that means that rather than treasuries collapsing, you might have the dollar collapse.
China is buying lots of this stuff, gold bullion. They can't get enough of gold bullion. India is buying gold bullion. China's buying gold bullion as a way to hedge themselves against these things. This is Warren Buffett toilet paper. Warren Buffett toilet paper here, the U.S. dollar. It's going to zero.
The United States will face debt burdens in the future that would make the U.S. look like a third world nation from a public finance perspective.
And we are in the process of setting up an economic crisis much worse than the one we think we solved. The currency crisis is coming, Larry. I know you think King Dollar is potentially coming back, but it's not.
But one thing I want to stress, this crisis, nothing has been solved. That should be clear.
We have unemployment at 26-year highs. We have teenage unemployment at all-time records since they've been taking records.
We now have a financial system that's completely based on moral hazard, too big to fail. All the big banks left standing believe that they are immune from any future failure because that's what happened in the last year. That's what Jim Guyton has told them. That's what Larry Summers has told them. And crazy things happen when you have a financial system like that. Now, the conventional wisdom is you can't have back-to-back major financial crises. I think we're going to push that. We're going to have a look and see whether that's true. The next 12 months could really be exciting. People could be very positive, but we are setting ourselves up for an enormous catastrophe.
We are still concerned about more credit losses to come over the following months. The second leg of the option arm resets and Alt-A loans has now commenced. And money is just pouring into all sorts of assets because people are getting very, very worried about inflation and the loss of purchasing power of paper money because central banks are just destroying the value of paper money. They're debasing the currencies, and that's why stocks, commodities, precious metals, everything is going up and the value of paper money is going down.
I mean, I tell you, when you look at the United States, you cannot imagine that they can solve their problems.
It's not a recovery. It's a cover-up.
The next country that is very vulnerable would be, say, Japan or the United States, and also in Europe, within the EU, we have the so-called PIGS, in other words, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And debt defaults throughout history has been very common for centuries. Sovereign states have defaulted on their obligations. Usually it happens because they borrow too much and just can't pay.
Now here we are, 1 year later in September of 2009, and they're talking about the possibilities of a recovery.
The employment situation hasn't improved much. I don't think that employment will improve very much. It may stabilize but not improve much.
They're saying that the stimulus program is now working. Well, what's going to happen when the stimulus runs out? When you can't use this paper money to create any more jobs? This is the likes of which no one has ever seen before. There will not be a recovery. We're going into the greatest depression. People better grow up about it. The jobs that have been lost forever.
We committed $11 trillion to the financial system. So no wonder that with such a massive policy stimulus, the markets and the economy have recovered. The question is how we're going to pay for it over time. At which point the fiscal deficit is going to become unsustainable, at which point this monetization of fiscal deficit is going to be also dangerous, and therefore, in my view, we're partly stealing demand from the future and will pay for the consequences of excessive policy stimulus down the line.
Well, we would all have a depression, or as simple as that. The policymakers all over the world thought that it was best to prolong or basically postpone the problem by injecting this huge amount of stimulus, by printing money and creating inflation. And although the Chinese are using their own money, I think the situation in the West is even worse because the governments don't even have the money. They're borrowing money, they're printing money.
And again,
we must answer history's call. 1 year ago, I took office amid 2 wars, an economy rocked by a severe recession, a financial system on the verge of collapse, and a government deeply in debt. And 1 year later, the worst of the storm has passed.
We have people in power that if our forecasts were as wrong as theirs, we would have been laughed out of business 30 years ago when we began. Why would people believe Ben Bernanke? Why would they believe President Obama? Why would they believe Larry Summers or Timothy Geithner? One after another, their forecasts have been wrong, and they're wrong about the recovery.
If I had come on your show every week for 100 weeks in a row and everything I said to you was wrong, would you keep me on your show? Would you have any confidence in me? Would you listen to me? Mr. Paulson, Mr. Bernanke, and the guy at the New York Fed, Tim somebody, every week they have been dead wrong. Why would you listen to them?
So gold continues to do well, and every time I come on television, people keep asking me, is it too late? Is it the top? I don't think we're anywhere near the top. As long as we continue to debase the money, as long as we keep stimulating the economy with printing money, the dollar is going to keep falling, gold is going to keep rising.
So where is the top, Peter?
I don't know. There's no necessary top because there's no low to the dollar. What gold simply tells you is what the U.S. dollar is worth or what other currencies are worth. It's a measure of purchasing power. So as the dollar loses value, you need more dollars to buy something like gold. Gold is not changing in value. It's the dollar that's losing value.
The minute you think of gold as money, that level is, it's a range between $4,000 and $11,000 an ounce. That's how much. That's the price gold would have to be to support the money supply. I talk to people about gold, and they say, well, there's not enough gold to support the money supply. And I say, well, of course there's enough gold. It's just a question of price.
This is going to unleash rampant inflation around the world, rampant confusion in the currency markets, and you're going to have currencies gyrating all over the world. Bond markets are going to start to collapse, and then we're going to have a real problem. And that's why the stock market understands this. They're unleashing a inflationary holocaust because they don't know what else to do, and they're making mistakes.
The other thing that is the kind of thing that will be a disaster, not just for the US but for Western Europe, is the unfunded pension fund liabilities and contingent liabilities arising from Medicare and Medicaid, and now Obama's new health care program.
We're talking $55 trillion plus in a hole, the federal government. $55 trillion plus. And secondly, nobody's going to bail out America. We're going to have to solve our own problem. People have not learned. You got people lining up at the trough. Government doesn't have any money. We don't have any money. And what's going on right now is massive taxation without representation.
Many governments have borrowed staggering amounts of money. The United States government, the United States Central Bank, the numbers are just, they can't even calculate them, partly because they've got so many off-balance sheet, things they've guaranteed and they don't know how big they are.
There's no combination of growth, no feasible combination of growth and taxes that can fund that liability.
We need to pay half.
We need to pay half. We can pay 30 trillion, not 60. So 4% inflation for 17 years cuts the value of the dollar in half. And that's what the Fed does best.
We have a money printer at the Fed, and he will print money and keep interest rates at zero, basically. And when one day interest rates should go up, he'll keep them below the rate of inflation, as Mr. Greenspan and he did after 2001, when interest rates were continuously below the cost of living increase.
If you had a nickel and 3 pennies in your hand, you had 8 cents. That's the value of the dollar relative to 1913 when the Fed was created. So the idea of price stability is nonsense. What they do is inflate the dollar to sort of prop up the banks. So they need to do that, but that's a dynamically unstable process. So if you try, they would love to do it gradually, and that's the plan. But if the market gets ahead of it, if the market sees this playing out, which they probably will, you could have a very rapid collapse of the dollar. That would be you'd see that in gold.
America has absolutely no intention whatsoever of repaying China that $1 trillion. America will never pay China back that $1 trillion, and they're forcing China to buy more dollars to keep their own currency from rising. thus killing their export market. And China has got itself into a conundrum.
How long would you continue to lend to somebody who kept saying, don't worry, I'm going to pay you back, and everything's going to be okay, after year after year after year?
You're talking about economic Armageddon here. Yes, absolutely. That I'm convinced. The fiscal deficit of around $2 trillion will add, of course, to government debt. It will be, in future, very difficult for the Federal Reserve to increase short-term rates because then the interest payments on the debt go up substantially. Then comes Medicare and Medicaid after 2018, and we have huge liabilities there that are coming due. And with the aging of the baby boomers, we'll have a huge problem in funding the expenditures of the government. And so they'll have to inflate. And then to divert the attention from the public, the governments then go to war. Yeah, sure, the states are in deep trouble. I mean, some have deficits of 40–45% of their expenditures, and I don't see a solution there.
The government is actually a source of our problems, that the stimulus is not the solution. The stimulus is why the economy is so messed up in the first place. And I want to go to Washington and put an end to that. We got to stop the spending and stop the money printing. And we have to let free market forces repair the damage done to this economy by government intervention.
You have to understand how we got into this mess. We got into this mess by spending too much, borrowing too much, and inflating too much. Government was too big and we had too many regulations. We had rejected the market economy for decades now. We had rejected the notion of sound money for decades. And we got into a mess this way. So what is the proposal? Spend more money, borrow more money, print more money, regulate more so. So it makes no sense whatsoever. So we're going to make the problems much worse. We're doing exactly what we did in the 1930s. We are determined to take a serious recession and turn it into a depression.
And so I take the view, eventually we'll have hyperinflation.
We're in the midst right now of the second American Revolution. Revolutions don't happen from the people that are going to be watching American Idol or waste their time away playing video games and their minds lost. It's going to come from a different area. You have people from both ends of the spectrum, on the far right and the far left, becoming anti-Obama. So the revolution is now being fought by a number of different factions within both the Republican and Democratic Party. And that's what's going to make this revolution happen. Current events form future trends. Look where the dollar's going, and look where gold is going.
Here, and I wanted to share this quick video with you because many people who've known me for a while have been asking me how I've managed to predict so many things that have happened with the economy over the past few years, and how I've managed to make a small fortune in the process while most people have lost a big piece of their portfolio or a substantial amount of their retirement savings. Well, grab a pen and some paper real quick because I'm going to show you exactly how I've managed to do that. So the first thing you need to do is go ahead and number on your paper 1 through 7, and then please write down these two numbers, 280 and the number 9. All right, so essentially I've been studying the economy and investing like a madman since 2007 once I learned about the inevitable implosion of the mortgage industry, which is actually just one of many major issues that are going to have a huge impact on your financial position in the coming, I'd say, 6 to 36 months. Well, the reason for the haste, for me, is that the biggest disasters always bring about the biggest opportunities, which is why more people became millionaires during the last Great Depression than any other time in history. So the only difference between then and today is that the scope of this disaster and the scope of the opportunity for people like you and I is even greater. So here's how I knew this was coming. Since the beginning of recorded history, every major empire like America has gone through a 7-stage life cycle, and you can actually track that by the state of its currency. So in stage number 1, a country starts out with good money, which is either gold or backed by gold. So we're going to write that down real fast, which is good money. And then you move on to stage number 2, and as a nation develops economically and socially, it begins to take on more and more economic burdens, adding layer upon layer of public works projects and social programs, okay? So we're going to do social programs for stage number 2. And that obviously brings us to stage number 3. As that nation and its economic affluence grows, so does its political influence around the world, and it increases expenditures to fund a massive military, okay? So we're going to put massive military for stage 3. And then in stage 4, eventually it puts that military to use and expenditures explode. We saw this obviously in the case of World War II, Vietnam, World War I for Germany. We all get the point there. So we're going to do expenses go way up thanks to the military costs. And that brings us to stage number 5. To fund those wars, which are essentially the costliest of man's endeavors, it has to steal the wealth of its people by replacing their money with currency that can be created in unlimited quantities. Now, for number 5, let's put fiat right there, and that essentially means money that is not backed by anything. It's just paper currency. Now, finally, the wealth transfer caused by this expansion of the currency supply is felt by the population as severe consumer price inflation, and that triggers a loss in the faith of the currency. Now, the United States went to a fiat currency and left the gold standard essentially back in 1971 under President Nixon, and he did that to help pay for Vietnam. So as we've seen, we've followed this 7-stage progression very closely. So that brings us to stage number 6, which is again loss of faith in the currency. And then finally that brings us to stage number 7, and essentially at this point an en masse movement out of the currency into precious metals and other tangible assets and commodities takes place. The currency collapses and massive wealth is transferred to those who had enough foresight to position their money into the right asset class beforehand. Now we're going to put right here end of currency and inflation. All right, so these are the 7 stages, and we are right here between stage number 6 and stage number 7. Now, the primary symptom of stage number 6 is price inflation, and I don't know if you've noticed this or not, or if you've seen the headlines, but during the calendar year of 2010 alone, we've already seen a massive spike in the average commodity price of food, which on average increased by 46% in that 12-month period alone. Here already in 2011, we've seen record prices for rice and wheat. We've seen Egypt essentially collapse because of food prices and food inflation. So we are clearly right here, and this is due to everything that Ben Bernanke and the Federal Reserve has been doing with the U.S. dollar and our currency. So knowing this back in 2007, I was able to position my money into certain asset classes that increased in value as the economy and the dollar sank, helping me earn a return of around 280%, while most of the rest of the world lost 30 to 40%. And if history is any indicator, I expect that 280% to end up closer to 28,000% by the time this is all over, and I'm going to explain why in a much more detailed presentation you'll have an opportunity to see here in just a few minutes. Now, here's the critical piece to pay attention to. The move from stage 6 to stage number 7, which has already begun, is going to represent the largest transfer of wealth in the history of mankind from people who don't understand what's going on to the few who do. So if you just stand still and keep doing what you've been doing, stage number 7 represents bankruptcy for you. I'm sorry to say, but make no mistake about it, this gap right here represents the opportunity of your lifetime. And if you want to get the full story and the timeline of what's coming and how to position yourself to profit, I'm going to be hosting a 90-minute free presentation this week that will change the financial destiny of you and your family, just as it already has for me. It's an extremely detailed presentation, and in fact, here's a couple of the things that we're going to go over. First and foremost, how you can get extremely, extremely rich during times of economic turmoil, even if you don't have a lot of money to invest. It's not a prerequisite. Information is, though. One of the other topics we're going to cover is what's going to happen to the economy in the next 6 to 36 months that will bankrupt, in my opinion, 95% of the population, and how you can protect your wealth. Now, if that sounds a little bit extreme, I totally get that. But do keep in mind that this transfer has already happened in 30 different countries in the last 100 years alone, and twice in the United States. So there's quite a precedent for this type of thing happening extremely, extremely often. A third topic that we're going to be covering is how I've increased my wealth by 280% since 2008. Again, while most people lost 30 to 40% of their savings, and how you can do the same. We're going to cover why you'd have to be, in my opinion, crazy to put your money in the stock market right now, except for a few very key stocks, which I'll be going over as well. We're going to cover Roth IRAs and 401ks. You're going to learn what I call a secret black box investment strategy that the rich use to grow their money and retire 100% tax-free, even if the stock market crashes to zero. So we'll be covering that as well. We're going to cover the top 5 challenges facing the United States economy and how to protect yourself from them. We're going to cover how you could have turned I believe it was $20,663 investment into $770,000 in just 9 years back in 1980. That cycle is repeating again, and this time it's going to be even bigger. All right, we're going to show you how that took place and how you can do it today. We're also going to go over what's going to happen soon that will make the price of silver jump from its current price today to around $936 per ounce, and gold from its current price to around $56,000 per ounce. All right? Finally, we're going to cover how you can ensure that your children are going to grow up wealthy, even if you're not wealthy today. We're going to go over strategies that the Rothschilds family used to ensure that wealth, and we're going to apply the same ones so your family can benefit for generations and generations. We're going to cover a very, very easy way to buy cash flow assets like apartment complexes and businesses, even if you don't know much about real estate or owning a business. And finally, the 3 things that you must immediately do if you want to profit from what is the largest wealth transfer in human history that's taking place right now, today. The bottom line is that I'm absolutely disgusted by what the banks, the politicians, and the Wall Street sharks are doing to the great families of America, and I'm making it my mission in life to provide as many people as I can with real information about money, about investing, and about the economy so that we can all prosper in this great time of change. Now, the last time I showed this presentation, over 85,000 people from 168 different countries tuned in to see it because they want to understand what's happening and how to turn these challenges into massive opportunity.
So let's talk about the economy for a moment. In fact, the CEO of the world's largest retailer has a very important warning for all of us, for U.S. consumers. He says that serious inflation is indeed on the horizon, and it's going to have a very big impact on basic necessities like food and clothing. Eric Bolling, the host of Follow the Money on the Fox Business Network, joins me now to talk about this. When the CEO of Walmart is flagging, folks, we're in for some serious inflation, he's also prepared. All his costs are rising, right? So that's going to be passed on to the consumer.
Sure, and his input costs are rising, the price of corn, the price of cotton, all the input to make and retail this stuff, transport it, forget gasoline and diesel fuel to get this stuff over here. But he also says labor costs are starting to rise out of China. So he went down the list of different input costs, labor, food, et cetera, energy. The bottom line is Americans have to expect higher prices. Now, Walmart happens to be a phenomenal retailer. They have warehouses around the country. They can store stuff where it needs to be stored. They can access goods in different places. So the effect to Walmart's prices may be a little bit muted or limited, But take a mom and pop retailer. It's just strangling them. They can't. A jeans retailer, price of jeans are skyrocketing because the price of cotton's up 115% in 1 year.
Yeah, so, you know, where does this, let's take a look. We built something that shows a comparison of just bread, you know, for example, just to give everybody an indication of how, and you can feel it. You know, when I go to the grocery store and it feels like it's just getting a little bit bigger, the bill every day when you're buying the same stuff you've always bought. So there's the price for white bread, $1.39 in February of 2011, and it's up 2.2%. That's a year-over-year change in bread. So that just gives
not
you
bad in bread.
Take
a look at corn. Corn's up 92%. Why does corn matter? Corn is in just about everything you buy. They use it for, first of all, ethanol. But in the things you eat, high fructose corn syrup is in almost every snack, almost every soda, every single cereal you buy just has either corn or some corn-based sweetener in it. So the price of corn going up, the input costs are going up across the board. The government won't tell you this, though, Martha. You know that core inflation number that they report?
Ex-food and energy.
Ex-food and energy. Why in the world would they leave food and energy out, the two things that we use every single day?
Because they're volatile, Eric, and so they can't be in that indicator because they're too volatile.
That's their excuse.
What is this? So where does this leave us? Because people's house, it's hard to sell your house. The price of your house is declining. The job market is very rough, despite the numbers that we have today that are a little bit better than they have been, which is a good sign. People can't, you know, they don't have more money, more discretionary funds to pay for these increases.
Hopefully, combined with the 216,000 new jobs reported this morning, and maybe all the other things that are going on. Hopefully, these quantitative easings, the money that the Fed continuously pumps into the economy, more money, but that gives upward pressure on prices. Hopefully, they realize, okay, enough.
Turn off the
We're not going to do it again. The problem is Bernanke on his last really public speech said if we need to, we would do more. Hopefully, hey, Ben, stop. Enough is enough. Enough of the pumping the money. Yeah, stop printing.
All right, Eric Bolling, as always, thanks so much.
Thanks,
Good to
Martha.
see you. You can follow The Money with Eric every day, almost every day pretty much, on the Fox Business Network, Monday through Wednesdays, and then again on Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern. It's a great, great show. Urge you to catch it on the Business Channel.
Fox News alert on the world food supplies. We have been tracking this story for a few days now, and it is getting quite some attention. Food supplies getting very tight. And on the commodity markets, food prices soaring to levels never before seen. It has been gradually showing up in our supermarkets, and you're going to pay for it in your pocketbook. And Fox Business Network's Eric Bolling has been warning about this and now says it could get much worse. We had you on 2 weeks ago with the cornflakes.
Yeah, remember this?
And it's happening. What exactly is happening globally that is affecting us in our local supermarket?
Yeah, we're having a confluence of bad things going on right now. Our supplies are already low of food, corn, rice, coffee, sugar, wheat. Supplies low. Now we're finding out the USDA tells us that, guess what, the crops that we're expecting to come out in the next, at least the 2 harvests, may be light as well, which means prices are on the rise, all coupled with, I don't know if you watch it, at the bottom of the screen once in a while you'll see an oil price go by, $92 a barrel, $91.48 right now as we speak. Those prices are going up. Here's the issue, Megan. When corn prices went up, when rice and wheat prices went up 2 years ago in 2008, it sparked food riots. Now, that was on the heels of a $147 barrel of oil, $4 gasoline. We're only, when I say only, I mean only in relationship to 147. We're only at $92 a barrel. If we were to go back to $147 a barrel like last time, that would push all these prices 60% higher. That's a big problem because these prices are high right now on the wholesale level. They're making their way to the supermarket. Go to the supermarket.
And the thing is, they're not only talking about higher prices, which is a big enough concern, but they're also talking, the World Economic Forum apparently warning that a rising global population, greater prosperity, are putting unsustainable pressure on resources. And they say, Eric, we could be looking at the specter of shortages, which could lead to social, political instability, geopolitical conflict, and irreparable environmental damage. I mean, this is something that could affect us on many levels.
Not could, will affect us. You see this, I'm holding up rice right here because in 2008, when oil went to $147 a barrel, rice prices spiked to $25 per 100 metric tons. They're right now around 20. If we were to see that again last time, the food riots that you saw on the side of the screen a little while ago would pale in comparison this time because people aren't as well off. The last time this happened was on the heels of a very robust world economy. We're not there right now. Megan, they were actually giving out cards, credit cards, to buy rice so people wouldn't starve. It's a bad situation, getting worse. And if the globe does grow, like you mentioned, it's only going to push prices substantially
And now
higher.
they're also talking about this flooding in Australia, where there's apparently a lot of cattle ranches that have been affected by the flooding.
Right.
And so now importers here in the United States that rely on that meat to fill orders for restaurants and so on are saying they're going to have to look elsewhere. And that may cause some problems because, you know, there's been some problems with importing meat from other places like South America. So now Americans could be affected in more ways than they know.
Let me show you how these things work. Australia is known for producing two things: a lot of meat and also a lot of wool. What happens with the meat? Meat prices rise. They've been going up. Wool prices. What else do you use besides wool as a complementary item or commodity? Cotton. Cotton traded today the highest it's traded in 147 years of trading, an all-time high. Prices affect each other. So when things like floodings happen in Australia or storms happen elsewhere, they push prices higher, and the bottom line is your grocery bill is going to go up.
Yeah, it's all tied together. Eric Bolling, thank you.
Thanks, Megan.
The dollar collapse will be the single largest event in human history. This will be the first event that will touch every single living person in the world. All human activity is controlled by money. Our wealth, our work, our food, our government, even our relationships are affected by money. No money in human history has had as much reach in both breadth and depth as the dollar. The dollar is the de facto world currency. All other currency collapses will pale in comparison to this big one. All other currency crises have been regional, and there have been other currencies for people to grasp onto. This collapse will be global, and it will bring down not only the dollar, but all other fiat currencies, as they are fundamentally no different. The collapse of currencies will lead to the collapse of all paper assets, and the repercussions to this will have incredible results worldwide. Thanks to globalization and the giant vampire squids of the Anglo-American Empire, the dollar is the world's reserve currency. It supports the world economy in settling foreign trade, most importantly the petrodollar trade. The money is then recycled through the City of London, not to be confused with London, and Wall Street. This fuels corporate vampires that acquire and harvest the world's wealth. The corporate powers then suppress real assets like natural resources and labor to provide themselves massive profits. This fascist, statist, collectivist model provides the money into the economy to fund an ever-increasing federal government. The government then grows larger and larger, enriching its minions with jobs to control their fellow citizens. Finally, to come full circle, the government then controls other nations through its military-industrial complex. This cycle will be cut when the mathematically inevitable collapse of the dollar happens. In order for our debt-based money to function, we must increase debt every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before, or we will enter a deflationary death spiral. When debt is created, money is created. When debt is paid off, money is destroyed. There is never enough to pay off the debt because there would not be $1 in existence. We are at a point where we will either default on the debt or create more money in debt to keep this cycle going. The problem is, if you understand anything about compounding interest, we are reaching a hockey stick moment where the more debt that is incurred, the less effective it is, and this leads us to hyperinflation. There are only two actors needed for this hyperinflation: the lender of last resort, the Federal Reserve, and the spender of last resort, the government. These two can and will blow up the entire system. I believe that they will wait until the next crisis and the whiff of a deflationary depression before they fire up the printing presses. That crisis is coming very soon, as we can only kick the can down the road so long. Money and emergency measures will be worn out. The fact that none of the underlying problems that caused the 2008 crisis have been resolved. The only thing different from the 2008 crisis is that instead of corporate problems, we now have national problems. In this movie, Greece will play the role of Lehman Brothers, and the United States will play the role of AIG. The problem is there is nowhere to kick the can down the road, and there is no world government to absorb the debt yet. This leads me to the top 5 places not to be when the dollar collapses. Number 1 on this list, I believe, is Israel. This Anglo-American beachhead into the Middle East was first conceived by the most powerful family in the world, the Rothschilds, in 1917. The Balfour Declaration said that there would be a Zionist Israel years before World War II and the eventual establishment of Israel. Israel has not been a good neighbor and has always had the biggest bullies on the block at its back. When the dollar collapses, the United States will have much more on its plate, both domestically and internationally, to worry about this non-strategic piece of land. This will leave Israel very weak at a time when tensions will be high. This very thin strip of desert land will not be able to stand the economic reality of importing its food and fuel, or the political reality of being surrounded by nations that don't care for it. Second on this list I feel is Southern California. The land of fruit and nuts turns into battlefield Los Angeles. 20 million people packed into an area that has no food and water is not good, to say the least. Throw on top of it huge wealth disparities and the proximity to a narco state, and this does not bode well. We have seen the riots for Rodney King, but what will happen when the dollar is destroyed and food and fuel stop coming into this area? Number 3 on this list is London. The land of Big Brother and the former empire of the worldwide slave and drug trade will suffer heavily. The stiff upper lip that the British elite ingrained in their subjects will not work anymore as the British population explodes. People will sacrifice and unite for any foreign enemy, but not if that enemy has always been the British elite. The Anglo-American Empire may pull off another false flag to distract its population on another Emmanuel Goldstein like in 1984, but I feel this collapse will happen before they can pull it off. This will make all eyes point at the British elite as solely responsible for this catastrophe. We have seen massive riots for soccer matches with hooligans. What will happen when the food and fuel gets shut off to this tiny island? Number 4 on this list is New York City, another large urban area living too high on the dollar hog. New York City is the area I moved out of in 2008. There's little doubt that all of the wealth in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut is a derivative off of Wall Street wealth. The savings and investment for an entire nation and much of the world flows through that financial capital. As the world wakes up to the massive financial fraud, this could lead to the destruction of capital like you've never seen before. This will have tremendous effects on the regional economy as people driving Mercedes suddenly wonder where their next meal is coming from. The 5th and final place not to be when the dollar collapses is your local metropolitan area. Urban areas in general are a very bad place to be during currency collapses. Too many people packed into tight areas, totally unprepared and dependent upon a dollar paradigm is the last place you want to be when the dollar collapses. You can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. Ayn Rand. To sum it up, those areas that lived highest on the hog in the dollar paradigm will most likely be the worst places to live when the dollar collapses. Most that live in urban areas will probably pass this off as doom and gloom, but rest assured, this dollar collapse is happening. It is a mathematical inevitability. We will not be as fortunate as to muddle through this collapse like we did in 2008 when it was a corporate problem. This time around it is a national or a global problem. The global Ponzi scheme has run out of gas as demographics decline, as abundant cheap oil declines, as our global power declines. This comes at a time when we reach our exponential or collapse phase of our money. The irresistible force paradox says, what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? We are about to find out when infinite money hits a very finite world.
Hey guys, I'm in here in one of the areas. I have some stuff stored in here. Got some powdered eggs, some MRE entrees, MRE sides, and honey, and that's actually what I was going to go over today. I think most people, this may be something a lot of you guys know, but I figured it'd be worth putting out there because even if there's one person who may learn something new, then hey, did the world a little bit of good, right? And if you don't know, honey is a great thing to store for a lot of reasons. First of all, it is highly nutritious. It's all natural source of good sugars, not processed sugars. You do need sugar for energy and stuff like that, especially in a emergency situation. You may need to stay awake or get a quick energy boost. It's a good seasoning or flavoring for a lot of what otherwise might be dull or boring food that you have stored. I find it delicious. Some people don't like it, but it'll also last basically indefinitely. Sometimes it'll solidify, but you can still melt it down and use it then. And I've actually heard that they found honey in Egyptian tombs that had sort of solidified into a brick, but they said other than that it was still perfectly safe to eat. And so we're talking like thousands of years, so you don't have to worry about it going bad on you. And another useful thing about it is it can actually be used in first aid applications. If you've seen honey before, you've probably seen this foam that accumulates at the top. This is actually hydrogen peroxide. So if you scrape off the thin layer of that foam, you can apply it to a wound and it'll actually disinfect the wound, has antiseptic properties. And you could use, there's a little bit of it in the honey itself, but if you want to get a bunch of it, get that layer that's foam up there right at the top. So honey's a great thing to have in your stores. It's not cheap, but it does last basically forever. so you don't have to worry about that. Just grab some and stash it away, and hopefully you'll never have to use it to put it on a wound, but if you do, it could be pretty useful.